Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Gaming Telecom video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. Undoubtedly, one of the more interesting stories for my mind this week is that Google are planning to release a competitor to both Sony and Microsoft in the console arena. Of course, games are big business now with billions of dollars on the line. It's no surprise that Google do want to, piece of the pie. After all, they were also a bidder for Twitch, which Amazon ended up beating them in, but still, that does not mean that Google are going to just sit back. And from reports, it would appear that they are planning a twofold strategy. One would be a streaming service that currently is codenamed Yeti, and another one is an actual piece of physical hardware, although details for this are not quite known yet. So let's start things out with Yeti. This information comes to us through Kotaku, where Jason Schreier there was speaking to folks in the industry, and accordingly at E3 and other events, Google have been quietly approaching games developers. Now, details are still somewhat thin on the ground exactly on the hardware side, but on the streaming side, what we can certainly understand is that it would work a little bit like, well, other game streaming providers do. Imagine, however, you were able to play something like, say, The Witcher on your web browser, or Call of Duty, or whatever other thing. And then, of course, that could be streamed to your phone, it could be streamed to your tablet, it could be streamed to your desktop computer, your laptop, whatever. The beauty of this, of course, is pretty simple. You don't need particularly expensive hardware. Therefore, if your GPU is a few generations old and you would prefer to game in 4K, well, by golly gosh, that won't be a problem. Now, from a personal standpoint, and understand this is a personal standpoint, I don't really like digital streaming. I personally prefer to own the games, although owning and ownership are a little dicey in today's digital age. After all, technically speaking, if Steam were to just decide, well, I'm going to delete your game from your library, and I'm not saying they would, but let's just go down a hypothetical for a moment, you technically can't do a huge amount. One of the reasons I do still like consoles actually is because of the physical disc, but even so, some games are half unplayable on launch. I mean, after all, there are reasons that day one patches now are so many gigabytes in size. Of course, what we do know is the PlayStation 5 as well as the next generation Xbox, which is codenamed Scarlet, are a thing. Scarlet, incidentally, is most likely going to be a family. And from what we can ascertain and reading between the lines, Phil Spencer does also want you to be able to play games on the go. And it would appear that Phil and Microsoft are also going down the game streaming route. So most likely, from what we're hearing, the family of Xbox devices will almost certainly have one device which is lighter and just simply allow you to play games from the cloud. And we can also assume potentially also it would be portable. After all, Microsoft are making a really big deal of the Surface devices at the moment, and it would be a logical step for them to go the extra mile and to really push and create something that had a couple of analog sticks and other bits and pieces you would expect on a games playing console. Yes, I'm essentially describing a Switch, I suppose. But we can also assume that Microsoft are going to really push the physical hardware, and there have been talks and murmurs from developers, admittedly some that have a vested interest in being nice to Microsoft since they're actually owned by them, but still, that Microsoft are not playing around with the next generation hardware. We can therefore assume that at the very least it's going to be pretty comparable to the PlayStation 5, and the PlayStation 5, from what we understand, is going to most likely be using Zen Plus, at least that's according to the rumours, and Navi, which of course is the next generation GPU from AMD, which will be after Vega. And so that brings us to a very interesting question, doesn't it? What the heck is going to happen with hardware from Google? They've got a couple of options. The first option, of course, is x86 to go very much like a, for lack of a better term, a similar route to Microsoft, to Sony, and in theory anyway, we could have yet another console that's using AMD, yet another console that's got Navi as a GPU, yet another console that's using Ryzen for a processor. Then they could also go very different. They could go down the ARM route, and I'm not even going to bother to mention the number of ARM processors and GPUs because well, even if you're going with this generation, the combinations are, well, ridiculous. They could certainly go also Nvidia's route, and by which I mean, of course, a Tegra. And there are a lot of options if they did decide to go with Tegra. Of course, with Nintendo, they went with an older generation. They went with Maxwell, but in theory, they could go with Pascal, perhaps even later. After all, we don't know what Nvidia are cooking up in the labs. It's possible they might have even a generation or two available to Google, depending on what stage the hardware is actually at right now. It's possible that they might decide to go the lighter hardware route, where, yes, of course, the system is capable of playing games, but it also isn't necessarily designed to play them at the highest resolution. Instead, it's more, if you don't have the internet connection, you're not totally screwed. But then it also could be a dedicated home console. And frankly speaking, I'm actually okay with that. I would actually really like to see a dedicated home console from Google. Of course, this does pose a couple of questions. Would you like to see Google step into the fray? Well, even if we take the fact that Google have an awful lot of money, which of course is a leg up in any situation, because having a lot of money immediately means that you can start acquiring games developers, you can set up more studios, you can pay for third-party exclusive games, you can pay to have that one extra level in a game, which means that people are going to crumble and just buy your version. But also, Google have a couple of other major advantages. One of those, of course, is YouTube. Yes, Twitch was lost by Google, but YouTube is also pretty darn popular, and that's putting it mildly. After all, this is the platform that you and I are communicating on right now, right? And they also, of course, have, well, shopping networks, and they've got mobile phones, and they've got Google Play, and all of this other crap, technical term, that could be leveraged and really incorporated into the console. I'm not necessarily certain that I would want a Google console in some ways, but in another way it could be really cool. It's kind of weird. Nintendo are ridiculously popular right now, but in most people's minds, they're not really a competitor. And arguably, perhaps Nintendo like that idea, right? Not being a competitor. And of course, ultimately, if you're not particularly affluent and you've only got enough cash for one console, you're going to need to make a decision. Do you buy the Xbox or do you buy the Switch? Do you buy the Switch game or do you buy an Xbox game? But generally speaking, they are very different markets, right? I mean, it's very possible that you might absolutely not really have time at all for console gaming, but you could still pick up a Switch. After all, if you've got a Switch, you can pretty much play it anywhere. You can play it in the middle of a plane flight, you could play it in a car, well, presuming that you're not the one supposed to be driving, although with self-driving that's going to be a good thing perhaps, on a train journey, or if you've just got a couple of minutes spare, you can just plug the console in at home, play it for a few minutes and then take it out and you're still good. So that's definitely a bonus there. It's the other major benefit that Google have, and it's got something to do with their money, but it's also their ecosystem and their actual structure, and that is that they've got a lot of cloud computing performance available to them, much like Microsoft there. Of course, Microsoft have Azure, and Google have, well, an army of servers, and an army is probably a bit underselling it, to be honest. Google have the capacity and an awful lot of research in artificial intelligence and all the other bits and pieces that could make it a very capable, very interesting console. If they've already been talking with AAA developers, it does tell me, and one of the sources apparently was suggesting that we would be using the example I gave earlier, something like The Witcher 3 running in a Chrome tab. That's interesting, right? Imagine something like that. So you could presumably be using your Ultrabook and just be able to load up Witcher 3. And of course, in theory, it would just remain where you are because it's able to save the data and play the game exactly how you'd expect. Of course, there are the normal caveats there with cloud gaming, which I won't go into because they're so numerous and obvious by now. But still, as internet connections go faster, and there are reports that by about 2020, 2025 at the latest, physical sales of games are going to diminish so much, particularly by around 2022 to 2025, they're almost going to be negligible. Perhaps in many instances, publishers won't even release games physically, which, from my point of view, it sucks. But it is what it is, right? It's ever-marching progress. So let me know what your thoughts are on this. This is one of those situations where there's not an awful lot of technical details. Perhaps in the future I'll do more of an analysis if more stuff comes out. I would like to do one on potentials, but I'm curious on your thoughts on this. Would you want a Google console? If so, what shape would you like it to be in? Would you like a family of them? Would you like just the single console? I don't know. Personally, I would like a home console, just to see what it's capable of. And it's kind of strange because I honestly feel it could go one of two ways. The first is that it's a massive commercial success. After all, Sony did manage it right. They were the first releasing a home console, and then they first released a home console and it just absolutely destroyed expectations. The other possibility is it could be a complete failure. I don't think we're going to get somewhere in the middle. I genuinely think it's either going to be really successful or just tanks terribly. So that's going to be interesting. Microsoft, however, have still been busy little bees in their own right. Windows Central last week released a report that they have been working with Razer. Why? To produce peripherals, namely keyboard and mice, which would work on the Xbox consoles. It's a very curious idea that console makers have thought of before. The idea of running around on a FPS or what have you on a keyboard and mouse is certainly tantalizing, and honestly, with crossplay becoming so prolific now on Xbox to PC, it makes sense, honestly. I can see the logic there of them doing that, and it's going to be curious how Microsoft decides to leverage this over the coming month. But fast forward to today, and that is another exclusive piece of news that Windows Central have managed to nab, and that is that Microsoft are working on official mod support for the Xbox system, and it is known as XCC, Xbox Community Content. Now, all of this stuff has not been officially confirmed as yet by Microsoft, but from the links we are looking at a multi-feature approach. Provides service level storage of content, upload as well as download, integrated catalog support, search, browse and discover content, additional moderation features where you can respond and categorize things, share mods with friends. And as for apps, you've got flexible to define what's moddable in your game. So that's of course for games developers. So if you were to decide, you know what, all I want you to be able to mod is the aesthetic of this gun, well, that's fine. On the other hand, if you want to go full potato and say, well, you know what, you can create your own levels and share those as well, well, by golly gosh, that would be something that you can do. Flexibility to define content enters your game via service, no packaging requirements, enforcing validation checks prior to availability, service-side catalog support, direct queries, curated queries and channels, and metadata as part of the service, sharing, promotion and rankings. Of course, Bethesda have really been stepping up to the plate with this. We've seen a couple of titles from them which do support mods on the Xbox, and honestly, I was really happy that Microsoft decided to push that, and to Bethesda's credit, they also really stepped up to the plate there as well. And I think the two companies really did something fantastic there, because I honestly feel that mod support is one area that consoles have certainly lagged behind on PC, excuse me. I'm curious to hear what you would think. I mean, mod support, to me anyway, as a PC gamer, is really amazing. I mean, holy crap. It's like, I'm gonna just gush for a second, but just imagine if mods had not existed. We wouldn't have so many games. I'm not even going to go through all of them, but let's just take Counter-Strike as an example, one of the most infamous and famous examples I can think of. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't have used up so many hours of my life hearing the bomb has been planted, the hostage has been rescued, fire in the hole, fire in the hole. Oh my lord. I'm all for it, and I don't necessarily think we're going to have anywhere near that level of support, although it would be amazing if we did. But these are the kind of things that I definitely feel Microsoft are having a feather in its cap for. It's not necessarily that Microsoft are beating Sony in every single way, but these little things are certainly ways that they can improve the value proposition. So for example, let's say that they offer mod support for a game, let's just say the new Fallout or whatever, and Sony do not. You're probably going to say to yourself, particularly if it's a single player game, well, screw it, I'm just going to pick up on the Xbox because I want to be able to mod and I want that community ability. I mean, even games that didn't really support modding on the PC, at least traditionally, like say Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. You could actually, with Knights, and this is very off topic, but you could actually get some of the cut content for Knights of the Old Republic 2 by simply because it was actually on the disc. It was actually on the original, ironically enough, it was on the Xbox release, but you can actually get that cut content and restore it onto the PC version. I'm not saying that you're going to be able to do that necessarily for this, but still, imagine having additional levels and additional challenges and characters. And it's pretty awesome. I do love modding. I do love me some modding. So with all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe. And I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.